Chelsea are not having a good season, and a long run of frustrating and uninspiring performances means they find themselves mid-table with more than half of the games played. So I thought I would take a wee look back and relive when Chelsea last found themselves in a similar predicament. So join me as I take a short walk down memory lane to 7 years ago, the 2015-16 season of the Premier League.
It's fake. It's a fake result.
Champions Chelsea had every reason to be confident heading into the campaign. They had been magnificent the previous year and broke a record for spending the most consecutive days at the top of the Prem, 274. The ever-present John Terry and his impassable compatriot Gary Cahill formed a rock-solid partnership at the back in front of the big Belgian wall of Courtois, helping the team to concede the fewest goals and record the fewest defeats. Up front, new signing Diego Costa enjoyed a marvellous debut season, bullying defences and ruffling a few feathers on the way to 20 league goals, a tally which saw him secure a bronze medal finish in the top goalscorer race. Talismanic winger Eden Hazard had one of his best ever seasons, chipping in with 10 assists to add to his 14 strikes. Club legend Didier Drogba also returned for one last hurrah to play his part as the backup striker and left his 4th Premier League title with the Blues.
I don't speak about players from other clubs.
Despite their comfortable and stylish triumph, Chelsea's rather bizarre player recruitment going into the new season may have alarmed a few fans. The £8 million acquisition of stopper Asmir Begovic can be regarded as a good bit of business in my eyes, as club great Petr Cech, no longer first choice at the Bridge, moved to Arsenal to see out his career at the Emirates, and Begovic was brought in as the player to be a dependable deputy to number 1 choice Courtois, something which he would have to do quite regularly as it turned out. 28-year-old Spanish winger Pedro, brought in from Barca for £21 million, was their best signing of the season, as he proved to be one of the only bright sparks in a dark and disastrous campaign. It was clear that the team needed defensive reinforcements. Mr. Chelsea John Terry was reaching the end of his illustrious career, and Gary Cahill wasn't getting any younger either, and the pair could no longer be relied upon to play every minute of the season, as turned out to be the case, with neither player managing to make more than 25 league appearances across the 2015-16 season. 21-year-old Kurt Zouma had arrived the season before and had looked impressive on his 7 Premier League starts in his debut season. He was indeed relied upon much more frequently in the year ahead. Even with Zouma, the Blues looked a little light in the centre of the fence. The transfer saga of the summer had been Chelsea's ultimately doomed pursuit of Everton's 21-year-old English centre-back John Stones. The Toffees stood firm and rejected 3 bids, the final one for £30 million, despite Stones asking to leave the club. A deadline day bid for PSG's Marquinhos was also apparently rebuffed. The club's solution to this was more Charlton than Chelsea. 27-year-old Senegalese centre-back Papi Djilobidji
Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that?
Was brought in for £2.7 million on the 1st of September. I don't know who thought that this man was going to be the answer, but he didn't make a single league appearance for this club before being loaned to Werder Bremen and then moving to Sunderland less than a year after joining the Blues, only making 1 injury time appearance in the League Cup. I guess desperation can make you do some crazy things. Similarly, the fullback slots were also looking a little threadbare, with Brazilian left-back Felipe Luiz somewhat oddly heading back to Atletico Madrid after only 1 season and 15 Premier League outings. This left them with Cesar Azpilicueta as the only recognised left-back, and on the opposite side, Ivanovic was the only senior player who could do a job there. Again, their response to this was risky to say the least. Eye-catching 21-year-old Ghanaian left-back Bawa Ramin had just enjoyed a wonderful season in the Bundesliga for Augsburg, making more tackles than any other player in the division. Mourinho clearly liked what he saw, and the young prospect was brought to the Bridge in a £14 million deal. He would indeed be called upon throughout the course of the season, as he made 15 league appearances, 11 of those starts. A second right back was not brought in either, all of which appeared to leave Chelsea very thin in defence, especially for a team which was expected to compete on 4 different fronts. In terms of attack, Colombian Radamel Falcao was brought in to fill the departing Didier Drogba's role as competent backup to first choice striker Costa, who proved himself to be rather susceptible to hamstring issues. Again, I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but Falcao had just come off of an awful loan spell at Man United, where he was rated as one of the worst signings of the season, and fitness issues kept him from having any kind of real impact, even being relegated to the reserves at one point. There was no indication at all that his injury issues had been solved, and this turned out to be the case, as he only managed 1 start in the league and 9 appearances off the bench, chipping in with a singular goal, meaning that Loic Remy was relied upon to fill the void, and he didn't fare much better himself, also managing only 1 league goal from 3 starts. The team were pretty strong in the centre of the park, with Cesc Fabregas, Nemanja Matic, Oscar, John Obi Mikel and Ramirez all representing high quality options in that area. Likewise, the flanks were well represented, with Eden Hazard, Willian and Pedro making up the senior options, and Kennedy and Bertrand Traoré waiting in the wings to provide youthful relief whenever required. So again, like I said, a rather odd and frustrating window for Chelsea, in which they failed to address several key deficiencies which may well have caused some trepidation amongst fans, which was surely not alleviated by Chelsea's 1-0 loss to Arsenal in the Community Shield, a match that Diego Costa missed due to injury, with the toothless Loic Remy failing to convince and giving an early sign of problems to come.
Our attacking players are not scoring goals.
Chelsea's attempt to retain the Premier League was essentially over after the opening day. The Blues were given a torrid time by Swansea, being reduced to 10 men early in the second half after a careless challenge from Courtois and Gomes, which also resulted in the penalty which would square the game at 2-2. Chelsea can count themselves lucky that the game finished that way, as Swansea pressured and really asked questions after the sending off. However, the main talking point of that game was unfortunately not Swansea's excellent performance, but instead a rather unsavoury incident involving Chelsea doctor Eva Carneiro and manager Mourinho. Jose was visibly incensed on the touchline after his medic went onto the pitch to treat stricken Eden Hazard, at the request and behest of the referee, I might add. According to the rules, this meant that Chelsea were down to 9 men for a period of time, as Hazard had to leave the pitch following treatment. Carneiro would later claim that a furious Mourinho swore at her in Portuguese, calling her the daughter of a whore. Mourinho's fury spilled out in his post-match interview, where he publicly slammed Carneiro and head physio John Fern.
I'm happy with my medical staff because you have to understand the game. Even if you are a kid man, a doctor or a secretary on the bench, you have to understand the game.
This sparked a huge debate and uproar and resulted in mass media coverage, which did not let up when Jose took the decision to demote the pair from sitting on the bench on match days.
John Fern and Dr. Carneiro, they will not be on the bench.
Chelsea and Mourinho were heavily criticised for their handling of the situation, and 6 weeks after the initial incident, Carneiro, who had been at the club for 6 years, took the decision to leave. She would later go on to take the club and Mourinho to court for harassment and constructive dismissal, a claim which was settled before she was due to testify. It's impossible to understate the impact that this had on Chelsea's season, as things went from bad to worse. They followed up their opening day draw with a 3-0 mauling at the hands of Man City, a defeat which laid bare all the defensive frailties I spoke about earlier. Captain John Terry was actually hooked at half-time despite not carrying an injury.
10 seconds of the game and Aguero was behind my defensive line. I must have my fastest defender on the pitch, but for sure Zuma should be on.
With Mourinho's side also looking lackluster in attack, the Blues briefly stopped the rot at the Hawthorns as new signing Pedro inspired his team to a tense 3-2 victory over West Brom, which saw further question marks thrown up over the form of John Terry as he saw red after bringing down Solomon Rondon, who had skinned and outpaced the 34-year-old Terry. All of this only served to add to the cloud of negativity, disunity and chaos which was growing over the club. 2 embarrassing defeats to Crystal Palace and Everton followed, the latter of which featured a famous hat-trick from Stephen Naismith, and saw Mourinho in full delusion mode when speaking to the press, also admitting that his players were frustrated with the results and happiness was at a low at the club.
My assessment is that my players, they deserve more than what they get. I think it's hard for the players. I can feel sadness. I can feel it's too much for them. They try, and nothing goes in. The moment is so negative that it looks like everything goes against us.
Happiness was not the only thing that was at a low, as Chelsea were languishing in 17th place with only 4 points to show for after 5 matches, and any talk of Chelsea retaining their title seemed rather laughable, as they looked more likely to find themselves in a relegation scrap. An ill-tempered victory against Arsenal at Stamford Bridge saw Mourinho vindicated in his decision to drop Terry for Zuma, as the Frenchman headed in the opener. Diego Costa was also at his shithousing best, as one of the Prem's greatest ever villains wound up the Gunners so much that 2 of their players saw red, a display of the dark arts which clearly pleased Mourinho, as he dubbed Costa as man of the match.
But for me, man of the match for sure. He brought everything to the game. He played the game like a game like this has to be played.
However, that adoration may have been short-lived, as the FA retroactively handed the Spaniards a 3-match suspension for slapping Laurent Koscielny. Jose received strong public backing from the board, but ultimately this did nothing to turn the tide, as Chelsea's poor form worsened, picking up just 1 victory in their following 6 league matches, with 4 of those ending in defeat. A 3-1 loss to Southampton highlighted both Chelsea's defensive frailties and the lack of depth in attack, as Falcao was unable to impress in the place of the suspended Costa.
I think this is a crucial moment in the history of this club. Do you know why? Because if the club sacks me, they sack the best manager that this club had. And secondly, the message is again bad results. The manager is guilty.
A 2-1 loss to West Ham at the Bowling Ground saw both Matic and Mourinho sent off, and Chelsea cursed their continued rotten luck as they were a hair's length away from an equaliser. Klopp heaped the pressure on the beleaguered Jose as he seemed resigned to his fate.
You go to a fight with different ammunition. There are some fights that you cannot.
Do you feel a little bit beaten?
As key players like Fabregas, Hazard and Costa appeared to be downing tools under the Portuguese, with the manager questioning the mentality of some of his players in interviews.
I feel sorry that I'm not a player, because I promise you, if I was a player, I would face matches in a different way that some of them are doing.
This run ended with an abysmal loss to Stoke, which was played without Mourinho as he served a one-match suspension for his unacceptable behaviour towards officials in the West Ham game. A defeat which saw Chelsea lying 16th at the end of matchday 12, only 3 points above the drop zone. I think if any other manager were in charge, they would have been out of the door long before this. But Mourinho is a legend at Chelsea and had a lot of credit in the bank with the impulsive and impatient Abramovich, and was allowed to continue steering the ship arguably long after he should have been given his marching orders. The following 4 games again produced just one victory, and Mourinho was sacked on the 17th of December following a match in which they were outclassed and beaten 2-1 by champions-elect Leicester City, with Chelsea perching precariously just a point above the drop zone. Dutchman Guus Hiddink was installed as the interim manager to help steady things and help the club secure survival in what was his second spell in charge of Chelsea, following his recent sacking from the Netherlands national team. So, what went wrong for Jose? Well, Mourinho himself was bemoaning unfair refereeing decisions, that players never get sent off against his team, that penalties are never given for his team, and that he gets sent off and suspended when other managers just don't. He also claimed that the team weren't getting the luck when it came to the break of the ball, that things are not falling for them, and they just weren't getting the rub of the green. And there are kernels of truth in all of this, but ultimately, in my eyes, the fault lies with Jose. His actions regarding the popular Carneiro clearly angered many of the first team players, and they simply stopped playing for him. The stats back this up. When we compare the first 16 Premier League games of the 14-15 season with the same amount of matches in the 15-16 campaign, it is startlingly clear. At the same point the previous year, Diego Costa had bagged a remarkable 12 Premier League goals with no assists. In the season of Mourinho's sacking, he managed only 3 goals and 2 assists, and in both cases he missed 3 Premier League games due to injury or suspension. Similarly, Eden Hazard had 6 goals and 3 assists in 2014-15. A season later, he had only a hat-trick of assists to his name, and was nowhere near as dangerous, influential and creative on the pitch. Talking of creativity, Cesc Fabregas was an unstoppable force in that department, setting up 11 goals for his teammates in 14-15, also grabbing 1 for himself, a tally which plummeted to just 3 assists the following season. Now, I understand that even the best players can suffer dips in form, but such a stark reversal for so many players at the same time only points to one thing: Jose has lost the dressing room. The team would have had problems enough, what with John Terry's loss of form and the club's failure to provide Mourinho with the players he needed to compete, without Jose putting the whole team and club under the microscope with his disrespectful behaviour towards an employee. Added to this, the fact that the team were dumped out of the League Cup by Stoke, and it's clear that the Portuguese was lucky enough to get 16 league games. The Chelsea fans understandably backed their manager. After all the success he had helped to bring the club, this is not shocking, and the source of their fury was the so-called 3 rats of Hazard, Fabregas and Costa. With incoming boss Hiddink watching from the stands, the Blues started the post-Mourinho era with a comfortable victory over Sunderland, although the influence of the Special One was still clearly felt in the stands as his name rang around the bridge. However, life, as they say, must go on, and when Hiddink took charge, he oversaw a remarkable reversal in results as his side went unbeaten in 14, form which saw them lifted out of danger and into 10th place. Notable highlights during this good run include the 3-0 demolition of Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park, with Diego Costa miraculously back to his best, covering every blade of grass and getting on the score sheet. Costa again hit the headlines with a last-gasp equaliser against Man United to preserve his new manager's unbeaten status. A 5-1 thumping of Newcastle saw Chelsea record their biggest Premier League win of the season. And it should be noted that Hiddink was not without his issues during his time at the club, as a manager injury crisis meant that he was without Zuma and Terry for a spell, with the former only managing 7 games under the interim boss before picking up a cruciate ligament injury and missing the final 13 games of the campaign. This forced Hiddink to field makeshift back fours of Cahill and Ivanovic at centre-back and Bavaraman and Azpilicueta at full-back, with virtually no cover for these players. A disappointing and unconvincing end to the season saw Chelsea unable to break into the European spots, and they finished in 10th.